Donald Trump is going to absolutely destroy Joe Biden in the 2024 election. That is what will happen if polls in 2024 are as inaccurate as they were in 2020, where Biden won many key states by significantly less than what was expected based on the polling average. In this video, we'll take a look at the 2024 election map if current polling averages are shifted by the 2020 error. Take Michigan, for example. Biden was expected to win by 8%, but only won by 3%. This would signify an R+5 shift, and since Trump currently leads in the state by 2% in 2024, the post-adjustment margin of victory for Trump would be 7%. Without further ado, let's head over to the map. We will start by filling in the solid states for both candidates, but this map is going to look a lot different from what it normally does. Joe Biden is only going to win 6 states by a solid margin, while Trump is going to carry a staggering 23. That's almost half of the entire country by a solid margin of 12 percentage points or more if the 2020 polling error were to be applied to the current 2024 polling average. And so for Joe Biden, he's going to win only the bluest states in the entire country, including California, Hawaii, Vermont, Massachusetts, his home state of Delaware, and Maryland, and he will also carry the District of Columbia and the 1st District of Maine, giving Biden just 89 electoral votes. For Trump, we have such a longer list of solid states. Basically, every single state in the center of the country is going to go Republican. Trump outperformed expectations in nearly every single one of these states in 2020, and he is going to easily win them in the next election. So with the default solid Trump states, he's already leading with 125 electoral votes, but there are going to be a few additional states in this category this time around. The big one is going to be Florida, 30 electoral votes. Donald Trump outperformed expectations by 6 points in the state in the previous election. He won it by 3.5 percentage points. He was expected to lose it by 2.5 percentage points to Biden, and so when applied to Trump's current 8.7% lead in the polls here, Donald Trump is going to win Florida by 14.6% in the next election. Up north in the Rust Belt, Iowa and Ohio are also going to be solid Trump states. Trump outperformed polling by 7 points in Iowa in the previous election. He is currently up by 10.5%, which means that after the adjustment, Donald Trump is going to win the state of Iowa by 17.4%. It's hard to think that just 12 years ago, in 2012, this state voted for Barack Obama. Ohio voted for Obama by an even larger margin in 2012. However, Donald Trump outperformed polling by 7.2% in the previous election. He leads by 10% right now, which means that Donald Trump is going to win Ohio by 17.2% in the 2024 election. Trump is also going to win the 2nd District of Maine by a solid margin. He outperformed polling by 10 points in the previous election. He's up by 14% according to the latest polls right now, which means that Donald Trump is on track to winning Maine by 24% in the next election. Now, before we continue, only 15% of you guys are subscribed, so please take this time to consider subscribing and joining my Discord server where you can chat with me personally. We're now going to move on to filling in the likely states. There are going to be a lot of them, as a lot of states will fall between that 5 to 12 point range if the 2020 polling error were applied to the 2024 average. And so the first two for Joe Biden are going to be Washington and Oregon. A lot of Biden's likely states are going to be his solid states from 2020. And for Donald Trump, a lot of them are going to be states that were battlegrounds in the previous election. So I'm not going to bore you too much with the states that Biden won by solid margins by in 2020 that are going to be closer this time around. So I'm just going to go over the margins in these states and show you guys just how much better of a position Trump is in right now than he was in the 2020 election. And so the first two likely states for Biden are going to be Washington and Oregon. The adjusted margin for Biden is going to be just 8.2% in Washington and 9.8% in Oregon. We also have the states of Colorado and New Mexico. In Colorado, Joe Biden is expected to win by just 7.5%, half of Biden's 14-point margin from the previous election. And in New Mexico, the margin is going to be 7.1%, a little bit better considering Biden only carried the state by 10 points last time. Out east, we have the states of Rhode Island and New Jersey. Rhode Island is going to be 7.2% in favor of Biden after the adjustment, and in New Jersey, we don't have any new polls, but based on inferences and how the rest of the country is moving, we can pretty safely assume that New Jersey is going to be likely Democratic. It's unlikely to fall into the solid column. Hillary Clinton didn't even win New Jersey by a solid margin in 2016. And finally, in Illinois, 19 electoral votes. The state is expected to go to Joe Biden by just 11%. This is actually one of the few states where Donald Trump did worse than expected in the 2020 election. Joe Biden outperformed the polling average by 1%, and with Joe Biden leading the state by 10 points right now, he is going to win it by 11% with the margin adjusted. And so with all of Joe Biden's solid and likely states filled in, he continues to trail Donald Trump, and we haven't even gotten to Trump's likely states yet. And it is with these likely states that you're going to see just how much pollsters overestimated Biden in the previous election and just how much Trump outperformed expectations by in 2020. And so the big likely state is going to be Texas, 40 electoral votes, the second most populous state in the country. Trump was expected to win the state by just 1%, but he ended up finishing with a 6-point victory. This translates to a 4.5% increase from Trump's 7-point margin right now, which means that Donald Trump is going to win Texas by 11.5% in the next election. In Georgia, Democrats were expected to win the state by 1.2%, and ultimately, Joe Biden did carry the peach state by 0.2%, but considering Donald Trump's 8-point lead in the polling right now, he is going to win Georgia by 9% when the 2020 error is adjusted to the 2024 average. We also have more victories across the Sun Belt in Nevada and Arizona. In the state of Nevada, Democrats were expected to win by 5.3%. Joe Biden ultimately carried the state by just 2.8%. And with Donald Trump leading now by 3 points in the state in 2024, Donald Trump is going to win Nevada easily by a 5.5% margin. And down south in Arizona, Trump was expected to lose the state by 2.6%. He only lost by 0.3%, and currently Donald Trump holds a 7-point lead in the latest polls from Arizona, which means that Donald Trump is going to win Arizona by 9.3 percentage points in the next election. The Sun Belt states aren't even going to be close. In North Carolina, we have a very similar story, another 9-point margin in favor of Trump. He was expected to lose the state by 1.8%. He ultimately won it by 1.3%, and he currently leads in the polls by 6.5%, which means that North Carolina is going to go to Trump by a 9.6% margin in this scenario. Up north in Wisconsin and Michigan, these states aren't even going to be close. They were supposed to be very competitive for 2024, but polling just overestimated Joe Biden by so much in 2020 that both of these states are going to go for Trump by 7-point margins. Donald Trump was underestimated by 8.4% in Wisconsin and 7.9% in Michigan. Joe Biden only won Wisconsin by 0.6 of a percentage point, in Michigan by 2.8%, which means that since Donald Trump and Joe Biden are in a tie in Wisconsin right now, he is going to win the state by 7.8% in this scenario, and Michigan by 7.4%, considering Trump's 2.3% lead on average in the Wolverine state. And so this will be the 2024 map with every single solid and likely state filled in. If we apply the 2020 polling error to the 2024 average, we see a lot of blank space up there in the Northeast, and that is because Joe Biden is doing a lot worse than he was in the previous election. In Connecticut, for example, Trump was expected to lose the state by 26 points in 2020. He only lost it by 20%, and Joe Biden only leads in Connecticut by 9% today compared to his 2020 victory of 20 points. And so that will make Delaware a lean Democratic state, with Biden only winning it by 2.7%. Virginia is going to be very similar. Trump outperformed expectations by 1.7% in 2020, and Trump is currently only behind by 4.3% in the polls for 2024, which means that Biden will come out with only a 2.6% margin of victory. Up north in New Hampshire, Donald Trump was expected to lose the state by 11 points in the last election. He only lost by 7, and considering Joe Biden's weak 8% lead in the polling right now in the Granite State, Donald Trump is only going to lose New Hampshire by 4.3%, and probably the most surprising state on this map is going to be New York. 28 electoral votes. I mean, this is a big state, and this is also a traditionally very Democratic state, but as we've seen in recent years, Democrats have done terribly in New York. Republicans flipped many House seats there in 2022. Kathy Hochul barely won re-election as governor to Republican Lee Zeldin, and in New York, Donald Trump outperformed expectations by 6.3% in 2020. Joe Biden won the state by 23% in the previous election, but in 2024, the polling average in favor of Biden is only by 9.5%, which means that the adjusted margin is going to be just 3.2 percentage points for the incumbent Democratic president. In the 2nd District of Nebraska, we don't actually have any polls, but Joe Biden was able to win it by 7 points in 2020, and he actually did better than what polling suggested. And so, like New Jersey, we're just going to make an inference that Biden is still going to win it, although the margin is likely to be smaller because Trump is probably performing better in that 2nd district right now than he was in the previous election. And we have 2 lean Republican states for Donald Trump. One is going to be pretty obvious. The other one is going to be a lot more surprising. The obvious one is, of course, going to be Pennsylvania, a state where Donald Trump outperformed expectations by 3.5% in the last election. Joe Biden actually leads in the polling right now. He's ahead by 2.3% on average in the Keystone State. This is Joe Biden's birth state, but with the margin adjusted, Donald Trump is going to come out on top with a 1.2% margin of victory. That's identical to Biden's margin of victory from 2020. We're now left with just 2 more states, and the final one that's going to go to Trump is not going to be Minnesota, but instead the state of Maine. The latest poll for Maine shows Joe Biden only ahead by 1 percentage point, and considering that Trump outperformed expectations by 3.9% in 2020, he is going to win the state by 2.9% in this scenario. So Maine is going to be a flip for Donald Trump, a state that Republicans haven't won since the Reagan era. And finally, in Minnesota, 10 electoral votes. This state has the longest Democratic voting streak, and it looks like even in a scenario like this, that streak is going to hold. Donald Trump outperformed expectations by 2.1% last time, but Joe Biden holds a 2.5% lead in Minnesota right now, which means that he is still going to win the state, but by a very narrow 0.4% margin. And so this is the completed 2024 election map if the 2020 polling error were to be applied to the current 2024 average. Joe Biden would perform worse than any Democratic nominee for president going back to 1988. Donald Trump wouldn't win too many more electoral votes, but just look at the margins. I mean, easy blowout victories in Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, all states that he lost in 2020. Meanwhile, New York is a lean Democratic state, and Minnesota is so close to being won by Trump. And so this just reaffirms the fact that Donald Trump is very well positioned right now to take back the presidency this November.